Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a weekly podcast bringing readers and writers of Australian fiction together. I'm Claudine Tinellis. As an avid reader and passionate advocate for Australian fiction, I make it my mission to spotlight local talent. So if you're looking for your next read or simply want to learn more about the Australian literary scene, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and relax. This episode is brought to you by Affirm Press. Listeners, if you're a fan of crime fiction, you may have noticed that cosy crime is making a comeback in a big way of late, certainly in Australia in any event. A subgenre of crime that many attribute to Agatha Christie has spawned many wonderful Australian novels that recently include The Tea Lady Mysteries by Amanda Hampson, The Poppy McGowan Mysteries by Pamela Hart, Fisher Mysteries by Kerry Greenwood, the hugely successful Ernest Cunningham Mysteries written by Benjamin Stevenson, and now Kate Solly's The Paradise Heights Craft Store Stitch-Up, published by Affirm Press. Kate Solly is a writer, mother of 6, and enjoys crochet. In fact, crochet and crafting are prominent themes in both her first novel, Tuesday Evenings with the Copeton Craft Resistance, and her most recent follow-up, The Paradise Heights Craft Store Stitch-Up, which I'm delighted to be chatting with Kate about today. Welcome to the podcast, Kate.
Thank you for having me, Claudine. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to be chatting with you. And I wanted to say congratulations on this new book. It was an utter delight to read.
Oh, thank you. It's a bit of a relief to hear that. I'm still kind of holding my breath because you write it, you never really know how people are going to like it. But I've loved spending time with Fleck and Trixie and the others.
Yeah, it's so wonderful. I wondered if you could tell me a little bit about your journey to publication, Kate, and whether you were afflicted by second book syndrome when you started thinking about writing this novel.
Oh, yes. Second book syndrome is a thing. I was very lucky that I had some other debut authors to go through it all with and realize that I'm not alone in feeling this pressure of, well, now I know I have a readership and I've got these beautiful readers that I've met. And what if I let them down? What if I'm a one-book wonder? I was actually reading Helen Garner's Yellow Notebook recently, and in it she thinks maybe I'm a one-book woman, is what she writes. And I was like, well, that's a relief. Like, you know, it's a common thing to feel that sense. The second book is a different beast from the first book as well. The first book, you never know if it's going to be published. You're kind of doing it for fun in spare moments, whereas the second book is a thing. So I definitely did feel at times the overwhelm. And it's funny, in the book I'm writing, Fleck has a moment of overwhelm when she thinks she can't solve the mystery. And anytime I was especially feeling that sense of, oh gosh, who am I kidding? I would go and write that scene. And so that scene got worked on quite a bit. A lot of how Fleck feels about detective work is how I feel about writing.
Yeah, that's so interesting to hear. You're not alone. A lot of people do say that very same thing to me in talking about their second books. Having said all of that, I am so glad that you pushed through all of that and second book is now here. It is wonderful. Tell me about your journey to publication. How did you come to be writing your first book and how did that end up coming to fruition?
It's an interesting story because I never quite know where to begin. Like, there are lots of beginning points, but I have always loved telling stories. I come from a large family and we would eat dinner and you'd want to be the one telling the funniest anecdote, you know, and holding everyone's attention. So I've always wanted to, especially make my brothers and sisters, my mum and my dad, my grandma, make them laugh. And so when I was older, my siblings were all overseas doing great single people things and I was at home with small children. And this was in the day of group emails. And they would send out a group email to the family talking about what they were getting up to in Vietnam and in Cambodia. And my sister was in London for a bit. They were all over the place. And they'd have these really fascinating stories about their travels. And I would write back in the same group email thread and tell them about my adventures in Aldi and in Kmart and at IKEA sometimes and all the funny things that would happen. And my sisters... my sister Emily was saying, you really need to write this in a blog, I reckon. And this was in the days of blogs. She's like, and I was a bit like, oh, who else is going to want to read this? I don't want to be putting myself out there saying, oh, look at me, I'm a writer. But she's like, I'll read it. You know, mum's going to read it. And so I thought, oh, look, I'll just do it for my family. I'll just write it there and they can look at it. And that sort of and a bit of a readership, which was very gratifying. I get very excited if I got a follower or a comment. And after a few years of that, I got up the courage to approach a magazine. And the first magazine I wrote for was this obscure American homeschooling magazine. And they paid I think it was $20 American for an article. But I gradually started to write freelance for articles. And I said to my other sister, Felicity, I said, oh, I love this. I love writing. I go to a cafe, I write. It's my favorite thing to do. When I get a little bit of moment away from the kids, I'll write. But it's really hard when I finish my column and I don't have a new one to work on. And it doesn't quite have the same flavor writing for the blog anymore now that I'm getting paid. I really liked it. And she's like, well, you really should write a novel. And I said, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. And she's like, well, why on earth not? And I said, well, when you're writing an article for or a column, you've got an editor waiting to hear what you have to say, and you have a deadline. And I think I need those things. So that's why I can never write a novel. And she said, okay, then I'm going to be the editor of your novel. Every month, you need to send me something new. It doesn't have to be much, but you need to email me. And we made a date like the 24th of every month. I'll be expecting an email from you with your latest pages of the novel. And we didn't do it the whole way through the novel. After a while, it got a bit much, but that got me started. And once I got started, that would be what I'd go. David would say, I'm going to look after the kids for a bit. And I'd say, well, I'm going to go write. And that was what I would do as my me time. Eventually, after several years, those little bits of writing became a novel. And I'd made some friends along the way who helped me out. And it just built from there. And I found a publisher because wonderful Kate Kennedy recommended me to Callie at Affirm. And that's a whole other side of things.
Oh, I absolutely love that story, Kate. So wonderful. So having said that, where did the idea for this novel come from?
Right. I started to think about this idea when I was in the middle of writing the first one. I was like, oh, that'd be another good one. And it was almost like having an affair. I'm not going to cheat on my book yet. I need to finish this book. But I was aware of, that's awful. I don't have affairs.
I love it.
Bad analogy. There was a tempting idea, but I knew I had to be faithful. What does that mean that they die when they get published? I don't understand. But I knew that once the book was published, I would be free to pursue a relationship with this new book idea.
Yep.
It was just Fleck. She didn't have a name at the time. I just knew that she was a mum PI. She would be solving crimes and being a mum. And I got it. I would like to say I got it from, I can't work out which one it was. There was a This American Life podcast and there was an episode of Dr. Phil. And if I was like, I could say, oh, yeah, it was definitely a nice podcast I got from, but it was also very possible I was watching Dr. Phil. They both covered this and I'd seen both of them. This mom PIs and why soccer mums are especially good at being private investigators because nobody suspects them. And I thought, oh, there's a good story. I would love to write a series where it's a young mum and she's busy with kids, but she's also solving crimes and nobody suspects the mum who's at the playground conducting a stakeout.
Yeah, an absolutely fascinating premise. So could you tell us a little bit more about the story?
So we have Fleck Parker, Fleck short for Felicity. She is a mum and she has 3 small children and her eldest is just starting prep. So she's sort of in the thick of it. She has a toddler as well and a baby who she's breastfeeding. So it's that busy, full-on time. She's feeling a bit like she doesn't really know who she is anymore. And I think that's something that can be quite common, especially in the new stages of motherhood. Everything is so full on. You're always changing nappies and cooking dinner and you sort of, everything is for the kids and you sort of forget who you are as a person. So she doesn't really know what she's doing, but she knows that she loves puzzles. And the Wordle is the highlight of her day. And she gets to know Trixie, who's another mum at the school, who is an avid crafter. And she crochets and cross stitches and is quite outspoken. It has this vivid turquoise hair. And Trixie decides that she definitely needs a hobby and takes her along to the craft shop where she volunteers. It's like a woman's charity that has a craft shop as a fundraising sort of thing, and starts giving her workshops on different crafts. And while this happens, there is a theft of the money at the shop, and Trixie is accused, and it's up to Fleck to clear her name. And in doing so, she might discover that detective work is the thing that really lights her up inside.
Yeah, such a wonderful story. And speaking of Fleck, she's an intriguing character to say the least. And as you say, when we meet her, she's feeling fairly invisible and drowning under the weight of her maternal responsibilities. And as I said to you before we started recording, I could totally relate to Fleck's feelings, her need to carve out some time to herself and the overwhelming, all-consuming, never-ending chores that seem to go hand in hand with motherhood. And I loved the way you showed her idiosyncrasies, especially her propensity for and interest in puzzle solving. Is that something that you enjoy too?
Oh, yes. With Fleck, I usually don't, it's a bit embarrassing how full on I am into puzzles. And so I wrote it into a fictional character, and that way I can say, oh, see, that's a fictional character. I would never be that obsessed with puzzles. I definitely am that obsessed with puzzles. I love it. I love the David Astle crossword. So the Friday crossword in The Age and Sydney Morning Herald is just chef's kiss. I love it so much. It's a cryptic. I love it. I can't tell you how many Wordle spin-offs I do a day, because that would be embarrassing. But I love Wordle and Waffle and Global. And there's a train one now that I sometimes look at. It's really bad. And Connections. It's not good. I have a great love for those. I think sometimes, especially, I'll be in a certain mood and I just need a good puzzle because it helps switch my brain off for a bit. And, if I'm really upset, I just need tea and crossword and I'll feel better. And if, a while back, I was recovering from surgery and I found I couldn't focus on a book, but I could do a puzzle. And it just, I love them. I love puzzles.
And I really love the way that you've infused Fleck with these kinds of characteristics as well. And there is a scene in particular that I'm thinking of from the novel in which her husband actually throws out the paper which contains the puzzle that she was so looking forward to tackling. I think that scene said a lot about their relationship. Do you want to comment on that a bit more?
Yes, that was a fun scene to write. I think it can be hard to understand sometimes, like how she'd got to the point where Matthew, her husband, is very good at setting boundaries and pursuing his interests. And he does that sort of unapologetically, but not in a way that excludes Fleck. He's like, yes, every third Saturday I go and he volunteers at the miniature railway and he loves to, work on the signals. But he's definitely willing to reciprocate so that, another Saturday she might want to do something. But Fleck's problem is she doesn't know what she wants. Like, she could have a Saturday to do something. She doesn't know what to do, doesn't have that self-knowledge. Yes, so Matthew had accidentally thrown out, it was like Wednesday, and he'd thrown out the Friday paper. I think poor Matthew, but she's like, no, that's the only puzzle, it's the only crossword I do all week. The DA crossword is the premium one. And he chucked it out and she had to fish it out of the bin because she needed her time with her crossword because she was so cranky. And he'd also pointed out that she had a tendency to collect the equipment for hobbies without actually doing the hobby. So their wardrobe was bulging with different kits and paints and things that she'd bought but had never used. But she had pointed out as well that, well, our shed and our garage are bulging with your hobbies, but nobody ever says that's a problem because men are allowed that space, whereas women aren't allowed to take up space. It was quite a big fight they had. They do love each other.
Well, I love the way he made it up to her, though.
Oh, yes. We bought her the paper and he put a rose in the paper right on the crossword, where the crossword was.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. When Fleck meets Trixie, who is neurodivergent, it gives Fleck pause to think about her own brain and why she is the way she is, doesn't it?
Definitely. And definitely as I was writing this, I think all writing is a bit of therapy. As I was writing this, I was processing my own Well, when I began writing this, it was before that. But as I was writing it, I came across my own ADHD diagnosis. And so I was processing beforehand that, oh, I think I might be ADHD. And then after, oh, I am ADHD. I definitely infused Fleck with all of those characteristics that I think are most like that in me, and some more as well. But I was thinking about, what does it mean to have a brain that's like this? And also, what are the strengths? I wanted to have someone who was successful because of her neurotype, not in spite of it. And Trixie is quite open about her own neurodivergence. She's also ADHD. Her son is autistic, and she has a lot of pride in that. I decided to write Fleck as someone who wonders about having ADHD but is undiagnosed, because I know that so many women especially are ADHD but do not have the means to pursue a formal diagnosis. And so I wanted to show that as being valid as well, because it can be very much out of reach for a lot of women.
Yeah, absolutely. And so well said. And so I wondered, Kate, what things in your own life and what experiences made you think that you might also be neurodivergent?
Oh, there are so many things. And of course, now I'm thinking I don't know. But I've always been known as a bit of a scatterbrain, and I can have my head in the clouds a bit. And there are lots of even things I've discovered later is also like I didn't realize that was a thing. And I was like, oh, that's, like I am very fussy about certain smells, and I have certain sensory issues that I've just papered over and masked a lot, like a lot. I'm getting better now at just being who I am. But as girls, and as women, we want to conform. And so we cover up the things. And I think writing Fleck was a way that I could just sort of have it all out there, the way that I am and the way that I think, with that, but with the safety of it being a fictional character rather than me being the oddball on display. So I definitely can have have to be very careful when I need to be somewhere on time. I sort of need to have the whole day to think ahead to be on time. Like, to be on time is a major achievement for me, and I manage it, but I need to be thinking the whole day, I've got that appointment, and I need to think back of what I need to do to get to that appointment. I can get very involved if I find a subject that interests me, I want to read everything there is to be written on that subject. And I find it hard not to talk nonstop about the favorite thing that I've just learned about. And I've trained myself not to do those things, but I definitely will have, at any one time, I'll have several things that fascinate me and I'm just so into and I want to read everything about. I tend to fidget a lot, but I've found out productive ways to fidget, like crochet. I think ADHD is a very overrepresented in the crocheting community because we've found an acceptable way to fidget.
Well, that's so interesting, because my next question was going to be, was your interest in crochet before or after your diagnosis?
Oh, definitely before. The diagnosis is quite recent, and I've been
Mm-hmm.
crocheting for many years. I was pregnant with my now 17-year-old son when I first started crocheting in earnest. I'd learnt the basics from my mum when I was a kid, but when I properly started crocheting, I was pregnant and nesting. So I've crocheted for a long time, and I never really, until recently, now that it's sort of in the conversation, this idea of women in their 40s having ADHD is more in the air. When I was younger, it was something that young boys had, and it looked different in a young boy. Whereas, I was a girl who was very well behaved at school, even though she was very disorganized and always handing in assignments late. I managed to go under the radar because I was so desperate to be a good girl.
Yeah.
It wasn't seen as a problem in the same way.
Yeah, indeed. Now, Trixie is a self-taught crafter, and she
Mm.
learns to crochet to help her deal with a difficult time in her life, I think we would
Mm.
say. And in fact, I remember my husband telling me that when his father died, his mum just lost herself in crochet for some years. And so I wanted to ask you, Kate, what is it about crochet do you think makes for an appealing activity to undertake when times are tough?
I think there is something very mindful about crochet. I think there's all you really need to think about is the next stitch and the next row. And you can lose yourself in that beautiful, repetitive, it can be a form of meditation. I had a character in my first book who also used it she was a nun. She used it as a form of prayer. And so there is that mindfulness that comes with crochet. And sometimes when everything is chaotic around you, like I can imagine if someone is grieving, it feels like the world is in chaos. Whereas crochet allows you to build order out of chaos, and you can have choices in there. You can choose the colors and you can choose the patterns, and you can bring a tangled mess of yarn into this nice hat or whatever it is you're making.
I love that. Building order out of chaos. That is beautiful. Kate, as I mentioned in my introduction, your book is a wonderful example of the many cozy mysteries that are being written by talented Australian authors at the moment. Did you know when you began writing this book that that's what you wanted to do? That's where you wanted this book to sit?
Well, it's funny. When I started it, I love the list of names that you said at the start. I was just like, oh, to be on the shelf next to those, because I love all those authors. And some of them I've discovered since beginning this book, because I wanted to read, in the area. When I first started writing, I wasn't quite as aware of cozy mysteries. What I wanted to write was when I was a child, I loved Nancy Drew, and I would look forward to the next Nancy Drew book. And I thought, I want to write a Nancy Drew book for adults. So that was where I started. And since then, I've discovered these wonderful cozy mysteries. And I'm like, yeah, that's what I want. That it's a lovely place to be. So it's not necessarily gritty, even though it still does have that element of danger. It's a lovely place to be. And we've got a satisfying mystery to propel it along. I wanted to try my hand at that myself. It was very tricky to write, but we got there in the end.
You certainly did. So what is the appeal, do you think, of writing and reading cozy mysteries?
I love the characterization in them. I love often there's a village feel or this group that you get to know. I would want that as well in my where you get to know the different characters and you learn, you can revisit them time after time. I love the intrigue of the mystery, but at times I find, even though I do love a good crime thriller, I don't think I can read too many of them in a row because I sometimes feel like the world's a terrible place. I love a hope-filled book. And so a cozy mystery allows the world to still be an all right place and a nice place to be, and for there to be hope. But we also have that lovely hook of I wonder what that secret is. I wonder what's going on there.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. And going back to Fleck and her interest in puzzle solving, she's an almost perfect candidate for mystery solving in many ways, isn't she?
There's that longing that she has for the perfect puzzle, because I've in the past, people have gone, oh, I know you love puzzles. I bought you this puzzle book. And I'm like, thank you. And you open it and they're just too easy. And, it's like, that's great. Thank you. And then you sort of put it aside once they've left. It needs to be just at that sweet spot where it's not completely inaccessible, but it's really hard and your brain just clicks in and you find yourself completely absorbed by it. And it's just so satisfying to work on and to chew over. And I can see that she has that love and that longing to solve a good puzzle. And I could see that she could bring that to her detective work as well and have a look over. And she would do it in her own way. It wouldn't look like the way another detective might work on it. She's got, she's set up a control room in her laundry. And it looks like, I think I say something like, if Mrs. Smith's, I can't remember the name of the teacher I made up, if Mrs. Smith's grade 4 classroom were to do a project on this mystery, this is what it would look like. It was just really colourful, butcher's paper, post-it notes everywhere. And she's got that all set up in her laundry. So every time she does a wash, she can look at the wall and have a think about who are the suspects, who might it be? What secrets do they have going?
Yeah, indeed. Now, Kate, I'm not sure that we can talk about the main plot twist of this novel without giving away spoilers, but suffice it to say that there were some nefarious activities going on under
Mm,
the noses of the residents of Paradise Heights. Is there
mm.
anything you can say about these issues and why you were interested in exploring them in the novel?
I think, yeah, you're right. I think that I wanted it to happen in the real world, even though it's this sort of idealized place. And I think that some of the issues that are raised by what turns out to be driving this mystery, I wanted that to be a social justice issue as well. And so I do like to explore those issues. I always like to write a summer read with a social conscience. And so this gave me a chance to shine a light on some of those issues as well. I think that might have driven me to make that plot twist in the end.
Yeah, yeah, fascinating. Many Hands was the not for profit entity that
Mm.
Trixie and many of the other characters in this book were volunteering for. It was a wonderful organization that had its origins as a women's refuge of sort, but it had fallen on dark times. And I think part of the story is a bit of a cautionary tale for many who might be involved in such organizations in many ways and the responsibility attached to running them. Can you say anything about that?
Yes, I was very much inspired, and I need to be careful in saying this. I was very much inspired for all the good aspects of Many Hands by some charities I've worked with in the past, and not the bad aspects. So I've worked closely before with St Vincent de Paul Society and the Carolyn Chisholm Society, who work with women in need. And I in looking at what they do and all of the elaborate safeguards that they put in place, it makes me think, well, what would happen? Because I wouldn't have thought that you'd need those sorts of safeguards. It makes me think, well, what would happen if they weren't in place? And I've definitely worked with organizations, other organizations, not charities, where they do have that culture of, well, this is the way we've always done it, and we don't need to change. And so I sort of took those attitudes and I put them on what would otherwise be a wonderful charity, but they've got some very stuffy views about, well, we don't need transparency and we don't need someone to audit what we're doing or anything like that. We've got our own business and we've always done it this way. I'm very careful when I say I'm inspired by the good things done by those charities I've worked with, but they're definitely very strict in their transparency and all those sorts of things.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Fantastic. Kate, in many ways, this is a story about friendship and finding not only like-minded people, but people that help bind a community together. And I think community is something that both your novels deal with. Is this something you're particularly interested in? And if so, why?
I think so. I think it can be so easy in our world today to become isolated. In this book in particular, I was conscious of how easy it is to become isolated once you have children. I remember when my eldest children were quite small, feeling a bit cut off from the world and lonely because I was spending all day with a small person who couldn't talk and not really knowing anyone in my neighborhood. I'd moved away from where my friends were, and my friends were still working anyway. I was like the first of my friends to have kids, so I'd sort of have these big long days where I didn't feel that sense of connection. And so yeah, I was definitely wanting to look at community for young parents, especially. My description of Flex Kitchen Table, where someone's bought donuts and they're just sort of chatting, and at one point Fleck has hidden the biscuits underneath some brochures that are already on the table just to hide them from the kids, because the kids, as soon as they see there are biscuits on the table, won't leave them alone to talk, and they'll just keep coming up and say, can I have another biscuit? Can I have another biscuit? That is directly from my life. That is me. Flex Kitchen Table is my kitchen table, and hiding the biscuits under brochures is definitely something I've done in the past. But I love that idea of the casual catch-ups between mums that we see between Fleck and Trixie, where it's just, oh, so at the school run, can you come back? I've got donuts. I actually had to change donuts quite a few times to other baked goods because I was like, oh, why is it always donuts, Kate? Mix it up a bit. I don't even like donuts that much.
I do, so I appreciated the donuts. Now, Kate, if there was one thing that you'd like readers to take away from this novel, what would that be?
Oh, that is a good question. One of the reasons I like to write about the domestic is because I think it's very important. And we do tend to be, as a society, quite dismissive of anything that happens in the family kitchen. And I think that's because we tend to be dismissive of things involving women. And that if it's something women like, then it's silly. And if it's something to do with a mum, oh, that's even worse. You know, to be an entrepreneur is wonderful, but to be a mumpreneur, well, oh, that's a bit silly, you know. Oh dear. Oh, to have a blog, okay, but to have a mummy blog, ugh. Anything mummy is just, oh, geez, who'd want that? So I want to try and elevate the domestic. That's a bit woo-woo, but you know. That sounds very important. I think what I really want is for someone who needs a good read to read it and have an enjoyable time for a bit. That is, when I think about it, that's what it really is.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing, Kate. Now, as mentioned earlier, you're a mother of 6 and you have now published 2 wonderful novels. And I guess as someone who's still pursuing my dream of being published, I can't help but wonder how you juggle your career and your family.
I like to say because I have very low standards. I feel sometimes like the jam on the toast that is talent for me is lumpy in some sections and very thin in others. And when it comes to housework, that's one of the thin patches of jam. I feel like my family life is very busy and can be quite demanding, but I think that possibly drives me more to the creative side because you kind of need that release from it. You need, like, when often caring roles can be very demanding, and to be able to, I think one feeds the other. I like to think it's like the push and pull of an engine. You know, it can be hard to get time away from family to write. It's hard both ways, but I think it's a push and pull of an engine. The family give me material, and often when you're in a stressful situation, it's really hard, but it's also excellent for writing humor. When the situation in life has you in tears, you know that it's going to be a great scene. It's going to be hilarious when you write it.
So what tips would you offer other writers out there who are juggling writing with other responsibilities?
I think my number one tip at the moment is a bit different, but it's to be kind to yourself. And that can mean many things. But I would say the hardest part of writing is the head game. And we writers tend to be sensitive folk, and we can be mean to ourselves. And so I think being kind to yourself, and something that was helpful to me when I was writing my first book, it's good to want to be Stephen King or Liane Moriarty. Like, it's good to want to be this international bestseller. Definitely don't give up on that. But it's also, I think it's worth seeing writing as valid, however it ends. And so for me, I thought, right, I will see as a goal to be able to write this to the end, like, you know, something so it's a whole book, and for my family to be able to read it and laugh, because I knew that my writing, they liked my writing. You know, I didn't know if I could get it anywhere beyond that, but it was quite a profound moment. We had a family holiday, all my brothers and sisters and mum and dad all away together in Apollo Bay after all the lockdowns had happened. We'd managed to get a house together as a bit of a celebration. And I had these 2, I was cheap. I didn't give everyone a copy. I had 2 printouts and they had to pass them around from Officeworks of this, you know, the novel from start to finish in a much earlier version. I've changed it a lot since then, but I was able to let them read it over their summer holiday, and they'd pass it around, and I'd watch them in a really weird way and say, what bit was that? You laughed at something. What did you laugh at? That got old for them very fast. But that's a good goal, to get to the end and then show it around. Don't lose the other goals, but the writing is valid whether it's published or not.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much for that. So, Kate, are you working on something else at the moment? And will we see more of Fleck and Trixie in novels to come?
I hope so. I hope. At the moment, I'm of 2 minds. I've started work. I've got these. Someone gave me these cute. This is not the one I'm working in. There were 3. This is one of them. These cute little notebooks. And so I've started actually writing longhand, which is not how I usually work. But I've started the new novel longhand, and I'm of 2 minds because I was like, I would love to see more of Fleck and Trixie. If everyone loves it, then yes. if it turns out nobody likes this book, maybe it won't be. I would like to see more. I'd like it to be a series, maybe. But we'll see. We'll see. I've got plenty of other ideas as well for standalone books. I do love to write.
Well, I can definitely see Fleck and Trixie as stars in their own series, and I would definitely love to learn more about them and what other adventures and mysteries they get to solve in the future. So don't lose hope. Keep hold of that little notebook.
I got heaps of ideas.
Oh, that's brilliant. Kate, it's been such a joy to talk to you about the Paradise Heights Craft Store Stitch Up. I wanted to say thank you so very much for joining me on Talking Aussie Books today.
Oh, thank you so much, Claudine. It's been wonderful.
That's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed this podcast episode, please drop me a line via my webpage at claudinetinellis.com, via Instagram, Facebook or Twitter. Alternatively, consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or Google Podcasts. Until next time, happy reading.